Hi, everyone. We'd like to welcome you back to Keys Without Banks. It's me and Anton, and we are here to talk about our first deal that we bought together. And that deal is actually in Killeen, Texas. I was the transaction coordinator for the deal when it first went under contract with an investor. And I worked with the realtor, and the buyer was all set to close, and like last minute the buyer tells me that he's bringing in a private money lender and doesn't want to secure the private money lender. And I encouraged him to do the right thing. He didn't want to do it, and I felt super uncomfortable, and so I send a message to everybody disclaiming that I will no longer be attached to this file and that I wish them the best with closing. Fast forward, coming to find out that deal never actually closed with that buyer. And they actually went under contract with two other investors that were also unable to close. So the realtor actually reached back out to me to see if anyone would be interested in this property because the sellers really just could not make one more mortgage payment. And so I kind of tagged Anton in, and he's going to explain how he structured this and how he looked at it. But we are really able to creatively structure this as a win for everybody and ensure that the sellers really got taken care of long term so that they didn't have to make any more payments.
Yeah, it's an interesting transaction, and in the creative space, things take all shapes and sizes. When this deal came to the table, the entry fee had been a big impediment to folks being able to move through and actually close on the transaction, because it was a negative equity situation because of the solar that is installed on the property. And earlier solutions had been to try to remove that solar, but that proved not to be functional, and that left them with a property that was significantly upside down, and at a point where they were no longer able to pay for it. So in order to be able to work on the deal, it had to be, how can we get creative, not only with working with the solar situation, but also get creative so that the cost of entry was at a point where it would be tenable to close quickly. They came to us via Amanda shortly before Christmas, and really needed to be out of the property financially right away, because they'd been out of the property physically for more than 3 months, and double dipping. So we had to find a creative way. So what we looked at is the biggest single expense on the property was going to be the cash to the agent. Obviously, the first solution many people try to look at is how do we get the agent to take less, and that's obviously a valid point, a valid conversation. But if that's the only option, it severely limits the ways in which we could work around it. So what we ended up doing with this is basically got agent carry. The agent agreed to take $1,000 of fee at the close of escrow, and then give us terms, 120-day terms on the remainder, with a trigger that if we dispositioned the property in less than 120 days, that we would accelerate the payment to her. Turned out to be a big win-win. We got the property closed, got the seller out of it and was dispositioned in a little bit less than the time window. So the agent got her full fee, despite facing a possibility of not getting the deal done at all and not being able to help her client or be paid for obviously the very substantial effort she had put in over the years. Because as Amanda mentioned, this had been a long road.
Absolutely. And I think that we walked into this transaction with sellers that were in a desperate situation financially. Like they were current on their payments. They had been stretching themselves super thin to make sure that they're current on their payments because that was really important to them. And they kind of had a mistrust for investors in general. Like they knew that this was a solution for them, but they definitely struggled um, because of the previous situations for them.
Yeah, they'd been on the investors had put them on the ramen diet for months as they waited for they were living they were living very having to live incredibly frugally to manage to keep both sets of mortgage payments plus solar payments um, going on. So it was very critical to figure out a good working solution for them. But it obviously had to pencil for everyone, especially for us to be able to move as quickly as we did. That property closed in less than 3 weeks from the time that the agent made the 911 call to Amanda to the the payments falling away from something that the seller needed to be concerned about. But this transaction also required an element of creativity on the backside with the end buyer, because as noted, this the property has solar on it, and that solar was and still is almost 20% of the value of the property is tied up in the solar loan. And that meant that it had to be sold with a loan that exceeds the pure underlying initial value of the property. So the solution that we came up with was taking both of those, the original underlying mortgage and the solar, and rolling them into a single seller finance note. And the benefit of that to us from an investor perspective is it allowed us to take those interest rates and take those payments and combine them together. But it had a huge benefit for the end buyer, because instead of having a mortgage that they could write off the interest on as a traditional purchase, and having a solar loan on personal property that is difficult to or much more complex to write off, they end up with one single seller finance note for the acquisition of the property, which gives them a very clear and clean way to have a single payment, a single set of interest, and critically, that the tax form they receive from our servicing company at the end of the year rolls it all up into one home mortgage interest payment. So it was another way that we could take a challenging situation and find a creative way to slice that up into a win-win on the exit side that was necessary to make the numbers work on the overall transaction.
Absolutely. I think this one is a really important one too, that I meet a lot of investors that are interested in walking into this space, but they're not really thinking about the carrying cost, just like any other property that you get. And one of the things that we got hit with, I'm not sure if you remember, but when we purchased this property, they had actually had the utilities turned off because they couldn't afford to pay the utilities. And it's December. So when we turned the utilities back on, our pipes had actually burst.
Yeah.
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 Go ahead.
Yeah. So there's, some contingencies, obviously in a typical situation, you'd always want your utilities to be on. You'd always want to be able to check those things, but that wasn't, some of those uncertainties were also what drove in the need to drive down the cash entry fee, because in the underwriting that we built that I had to build into it as we were looking at how we would go into the transaction, we did put in higher carrying costs, both in terms of duration, meaning the number of months that we would need to service the primary mortgage and the solar, but also that we might have repairs, we might have unknowns, so we needed a larger contingency. And thankfully the we had the contingency already built into the transaction, so that when we had that situation, and also you probably remember the panicked call we got that the garage door refused to close. The buyer had gone to visit the property, and the garage door was opened and refused to close.
Yes, I do remember that. And neither one of us are in Killeen, Texas.
Yeah.
And so luckily on both situations, we were able to find amazing contractors that assisted with those situations. But I'm super grateful that when you do your underwriting on these properties, that you do take into account that the unexpected is to be expected.
Absolutely. And it's important to think about when you talk about an entry fee, and especially as you see properties that are marketed for sale by investors to other investors, the entry fee is typically in those pitches framed as what's the cash to close, specifically to a wholesale fee, to an agent, and to the seller. And in reality, the entry fee needs to be viewed in a much broader sense. You've got, of course, those are real costs: assignment fees, realtor fees, cash to the seller. But there's the closing costs that have to be factored in, transaction coordination, and support costs. But also, what are the hard costs that you're going to face afterwards when you close the property? You have to factor in 2 to 3, at minimum 2 to 3 months of carrying costs for the notes that you're servicing. You have to take into account the utilities, the water, the electricity, the gas, especially in the winter, where those can be significant costs on the heating side. And then in the summer, that you're going to have significant water costs to maintain the landscaping and things on the property, and have the cost associated with making sure the lawn's mowed and everything on the property is in good condition. So really looking at that entry fee in a broader sense, that in this situation, fully two-thirds of the entry fee was those pieces of the entry fee that people don't talk about. And had we underwritten it based on that on a traditional, just very basics of an entry fee, could have been a very painful experience that would have left a gap of $10,000 to $15,000, which could bite especially a new investor that might be watching this, who doesn't have reserves because they're on their first or second property. Could make that a very bad situation.
Agreed. In your underwriting, another thing I'd love for you to touch on is how the payments work, because this is a misconception I hear a lot, is how the payments work when you close with the end buyer and servicing and all of that. So how do you underwrite that in there as well?
That's a really great question. That's another area that can often trip folks up, because mortgages, and in this case seller finance or sub 2, that end buyer pays mortgage like a mortgage. It's paid in arrears, meaning that they're not going to make a payment for 30 to 45 days after closing, meaning that you have an amount of entry fee that is associated with bridging from the time that the property is dispositioned to when that person is actually going to make their first payment. That's obviously something that's specific into the seller finance or wrap disposition space, but something that you've got to really take into account of what's the real costs, real out-of-pocket costs that gets you from closing of your A to B to when C is paying the bills. There's a lot in the middle there that is really important. What we'll do in a nearby upcoming Zoom is we'll get in front of a whiteboard and kind of break out in more detail how those come together, so that folks can get a deeper understanding of what are those pieces, now that we've emphasized the criticality of them.
Agreed. And there's so many intricacies involved in this. A lot of times I have people come to me as a TC, and they want to get in this space and they want to do a wrap, and there's just such an underestimation of the costs that go into it. Everyone thinks that you pay less than 10% to the seller and you get over 10% from the buyer and you're good. And the reality is most of your entry fee from the buyer probably doesn't even cover your entry fee to the property, period. And that's a cost association with it. And the other thing that I'd like to make sure that we kind of touch on in another video is the ongoing operations of owning properties like this, that you can't set it and forget it, that a lot of people think that you can. And so I think that there just has to be a lot of knowledge when you're getting into this space, that you're doing a lot of good. And I love that we help a lot of our Killeen seller. We love them. We have a great communication with them. We talk to them all the time. We have a fantastic buyer in the property. This property really has some of the best people involved in it. The realtor has brought us multiple other deals. We won a lot on this deal. But I just want to encourage everyone to make good underwriting decisions when moving forward.
Yeah, making good underwriting decisions is really important. And for when you're working on a transaction like this, to make sure that you're working with people that have good experience, especially if you're new, to make sure that the assumptions that you're making in your underwriting are valid. That's very critical. And then what's even more critical is to make sure that you have all the categories, because you can have perfect estimates and have gone in eyes wide open on, you know, the big pieces, but if you're missing pieces, then your underwriting could really come and bite you. So that's really important. I'd love to also kind of get feedback from, you know, people that are watching this video. What do you think about when you're doing a, you know, wrap transaction and underwriting? Yeah, what questions, you know, do you ask? You know, put those down in the comments. And for those that have any questions about you know, any of the elements that we have talked about, please also put those down in the comments. So when we do the next video, you know, we can answer some additional questions, and then also, you know, we know what to focus on. What are the burning questions?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time today, Anton. If anyone has questions on structuring these types of deals, or you want to work with us in any way, please reach out to either one of us on Instagram. And we look forward to working with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got our Instagram names. Please reach out, and love to work with. Love to help. Whether you've got a property that you need to get out of, a property you need to get into, or you want to partner with us either with a property or with as a financial investor to deals like this. Please reach out to us, and we look forward to the opportunity to work with you. And want to say thanks, thanks, Amanda. This was our first of many deals as investor partners, and it's been great working with you. So thank you.
Thank you.